The morning David Callahan opened their shared bank account, he wasn't looking for betrayal. He was checking if the mortgage had cleared. But one transaction stopped him cold. $2,950, Ridgeview Apartments, recurring every month. And the recipient? M. Reynolds, his wife's family friend, his business partner, the man who toasted them on their 10th anniversary. For 10 seconds, David didn't blink. He scrolled. Saw the same transfer the month before and before that. Then Laura's voice floated from the kitchen, sweet and casual. Honey, did the bank send the statement? He looked up, watching the woman who once said she'd rather die than hurt him, pouring coffee like nothing was wrong. She kissed his cheek, smiling. You're always checking numbers. He smiled back. But in that smile, something shattered, because numbers don't lie. People do. And as he watched her walk away, hair brushed, perfume expensive, secrets more expensive, David wasn't angry. He was curious. How long had she been paying another man's rent? And why was his best friend's name written in their bank history? Like a confession she forgot to hide? What kind of wife steals from her husband to keep her lover housed? And what kind of husband stays quiet, smiling, while planning what comes next? The sound of the coffee machine filled the silence that followed. Laura hummed faintly under her breath, unaware that every note of her tune now made him sick. David sat perfectly still at the kitchen counter, his laptop open, the screen reflecting the man he no longer recognized. She moved with practiced grace, pouring oat milk, slicing fruit, checking her phone. Her nails were painted pale pink. He remembered paying for the manicure last week. He noticed everything now. The little things he used to ignore were suddenly evidence. Want some toast? She asked. He looked up. Sure, he said softly. Her phone buzzed again. A quick glance, a half smile. She typed fast, her thumb trembling ever so slightly. David's stomach twisted, but his face stayed calm. He'd built companies, negotiated with investors, survived 2 market crashes. But nothing had ever required this kind of discipline, sitting inches away from the woman who was paying another man's rent with his money. She left for the gym at 9. By 9:30, David had printed every transaction from the last 6 months. By 10, he'd called in a favor. At 10:42 a.m., Alexis Vaughn, a forensic accountant he once partnered with during a corporate audit, answered his call. David Callahan, she said, half teasing. Been a while. You sound tense. He hesitated. I need a personal audit. Discreet. Spousal? Maybe. Understood. By noon, Alexis had what she needed. Screenshots, account numbers, timestamps. And by evening, her email came through. One line in bold, lease confirmation. Ridgeview Apartments, Unit 5C. Tenant, Laura Callahan. Payments via Michael Reynolds. The words didn't just confirm suspicion. They rewrote history. David printed the document, stapled it neatly, and slid it into a blue folder labeled Tax 2024. He placed it beside the family portrait on his desk, the one Laura insisted they take last Christmas, their smiles framed by fairy lights. Now the picture looked like a crime scene. That night, Laura returned home glowing from her spin class. She wrapped her arms around him, kissed his neck, and whispered, You work too hard. He held her a moment longer than usual. Maybe I do. Upstairs, she showered and sang. Downstairs, David sat in the dining room with his laptop open. The only light came from the screen. He rechecked the statements again, though he already knew every line by heart. Her phone buzzed on the table. He didn't mean to look, but he did. The preview glowed for 2 seconds. I missed you last night. Same place tomorrow? M. He stared at it until it went dark. Then he whispered to himself, Same place tomorrow, and leaned back in his chair. The sound of water running upstairs grew louder. The light flickered across his face, half fury, half focus. He closed the laptop, stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen, made 2 cups of tea. When she came down, hair damp, robe tied loosely, she smiled. You made me tea? That's sweet. He handed her a cup. Couldn't sleep, he said. She sipped, unaware her entire world was about to fracture. You okay? David smiled faintly. Perfect. Inside, something colder than rage was forming, something patient, deliberate, surgical. Because David Callahan wasn't planning to confront his wife tonight. He was planning to dismantle her world, quietly, legally, completely. And before this ended, Laura wouldn't just lose him. She'd lose everything she ever thought she controlled. The morning after the discovery, David Callahan woke before sunrise. Not from rest. His mind hadn't slept. The blue folder on his desk, labeled Tax 2024, wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was a ticking clock. He sat in silence, watching the city through his office window, the early light slicing through glass like a blade. His wife, Laura, was still asleep upstairs, wrapped in sheets that smelled faintly of lavender and lies. Every sound in the house felt louder now. The coffee machine, the fridge hum, the faint rhythm of her breathing. Each noise reminded him that his home had become a stage. Every gesture rehearsed, every smile rehearsed, every I love you recycled. He didn't trust words anymore. Only numbers, and numbers never lied. At 8:15 a.m., Laura walked into the kitchen wearing his favorite silk robe. "You're up early again," she said softly, brushing her hair back. David smiled. "Just got a few wires to review." He said it the same way he used to when he worked on quarterly reports. She smiled, believing him. Because why wouldn't she? He'd never given her a reason to think she was being watched, but this time he was watching everything. As soon as she left for yoga class, David opened his laptop. He logged into their shared bank account again and traced the transfer backward, cross-referencing timestamps, source accounts, merchant IDs. His fingers didn't shake. He was calm now, calculating. Then he opened a secure chat. Alexis Vaughn, the forensic accountant, had already sent him an update. From Alexis V. to D. Callahan. Subject, Ridgeview Inquiry. Confirmed. Apartment registered under Michael Reynolds. Tenant contact listed as Laura Callahan, secondary. Lease shows dual signatories. Rent fully prepaid for 6 months via joint account plus supplemental payment from Michael's business debit card. I'll have photographic confirmation by tonight. David stared at the screen. The words didn't sting, they stabilized him. Truth had a strange way of doing that. It wasn't comfort, but clarity. He typed back one line. Keep going. Quietly. By noon, Alexis was parked across from Ridgeview Apartments. The building was high-end but understated. Glass balconies, marble lobby, discreet doorman. She sent David a photo from her phone. Laura's car in the guest lot. David's reply came in seconds. Timestamp every movement. That night, he received a batch of photos. Laura exiting the building in gym clothes at 5:17 p.m., laughing with a tall man in a navy suit. Michael Reynolds. The same man whose name appeared on the rent transaction. David stared at the images until his vision blurred. Then he saved them in a hidden folder on his external drive, labeled Q1 Strategy Meeting. At dinner, Laura was radiant. You won't believe how intense yoga was today, she said, serving pasta. David twirled his fork. Hot day for yoga. She laughed. Oh, you know me. I love a good challenge. He looked her in the eyes, calm, even kind. Yeah, you always did. For a moment, she looked uncertain, like she sensed something different. But it passed. She returned to small talk, to stories about neighbors, to pretending her marriage was untouched. When she reached for her phone, David caught the reflection of a message flash across the screen. A name. M. He didn't need to read it. He already knew what it said. That night, when the house went silent, David slipped into his office and opened a new email draft to his attorney contact. To Maya Alvarez. Subject, private matter. Need to discuss possible financial misconduct and potential marital fraud. Prefer in-person, confidential. He hesitated, then added, also need information on legal custody procedures. He hit send. Then he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. A part of him still wanted to believe there was an explanation, some desperate human reason. But logic whispered what love refused to admit. Laura wasn't just cheating. She was stealing. And if she could steal money from their account to fund her lover's life, How much else had she been taking? The next morning, David's phone buzzed. It was Maya. Got your message. Come in at 4 p.m. Bring everything you have. He printed Alexis's report, every photo, every statement. He placed them in a plain black folder this time, no label. Laura kissed him goodbye at the door, telling him she was meeting her friend Rachel for brunch. He smiled, adjusted her coat, and said softly, "You deserve a good day." As she drove off, he whispered to himself, "So do I." He watched her taillights fade down the street, and his expression changed. No emotion, just precision. Because the kindest thing David Callahan would ever do for his wife again was let her keep believing he still loved her. Maya Alvarez's office sat on the 12th floor of a downtown building that smelled faintly of paper, polish, and quiet victories. When David Callahan stepped out of the elevator, his heartbeat matched the hum of the fluorescent lights. He wasn't a man used to lawyers. He'd never needed one. But betrayal has a way of making even the calmest men learn new languages, like the language of legal war. Maya rose from behind her desk. Sharp suit, steady eyes, the kind of woman who won without ever raising her voice. "David," she greeted, shaking his hand, "I read your email. You said you have evidence." He placed the black folder on her desk and said softly, "Enough to burn down a marriage." She opened it. One by one, she spread the documents out like cards in a poker game. Bank statements, photos, leasing contracts, timestamps, even a printout of the message from Em Reynolds. Maya's brow furrowed. "This isn't just infidelity," she said. "It's financial misconduct. You're telling me your wife used joint funds to pay for her lover's apartment?" David nodded once. 3 months, maybe more. "And the lover is your business partner?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. Maya exhaled slowly. "Then this won't just be a divorce. This will be a case." She began to take notes, speaking as she wrote. "We'll start with 3 fronts: financial, custodial, reputational. Quietly. You don't tip her off until we're ready." David listened, expression unreadable. "What happens first?" "First, we lock down your finances, separate accounts, redirect payroll, stop joint withdrawals." She slid a form toward him. "Authorize me as your counsel for preliminary protection." He signed without hesitation. "Second," she continued, "we hire a forensic accountant to trace every cent. If she's been moving funds, we'll find out." "You mentioned Alexis Vaughn?" "She's already on it." "Good, keep her discreet. Every statement, every transfer, make sure we have chain of custody. I want everything admissible in court." David nodded. He liked the way she spoke, precise, surgical, without pity. "Third," Maya said, her pen stopping midair, "we prepare for discovery. When we file, she'll panic. And when she panics, she'll make mistakes. That's when we'll catch everything else. Communications, gifts, hidden accounts, whatever your partner's company might have been covering." David leaned back. "And custody?" "Custody comes after we confirm paternity." He froze. "Paternity?" Her eyes lifted to meet his. "You mentioned 2 kids. If there's a possibility they're not biologically yours, it affects the entire case. Custody, support, settlement, everything." He looked down at the table. His throat tightened. "They call me Dad. Every day." Maya's voice softened. "That doesn't have to change, but the truth has to come first." That evening, driving home, David watched the city blur by. Billboards, glass towers, people crossing streets with coffee and phones, all of them moving like nothing mattered. But for him, everything had shifted. He arrived home to find Laura at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, candles lit, soft jazz playing, the picture of normal. "Long day?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, loosening his tie. "Lawyers, quarterly filings." She smiled sympathetically. "You're always carrying the world, aren't you?" He smiled back. "Not anymore." Later that night, as she slept beside him, David lay awake staring at the ceiling. The glow from the streetlight traced faint patterns on the wall, like bars on a cell. He was free to leave at any moment, but he didn't. Not yet. Because revenge wasn't about rage, it was about timing. He replayed Maya's words in his head. Financial, custodial, reputational. 3 fronts, 3 openings. He'd turn each into a weapon, and when the time came, he'd add 4 more, each one sharper than the last. The next morning, before the sun rose, David logged into a new account, one only he could access. He transferred half their remaining balance into it, legally, quietly. Then he called the HR director at his company and arranged for his next paycheck to be rerouted to a private bank. When Laura came downstairs, she found him making pancakes for the kids. He looked the same, calm, gentle, predictable. She kissed his cheek. "You're in a good mood today." He smiled, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "Just thinking about the future." She laughed lightly. "Finally." He turned toward her and said softly, "Yeah, finally." But inside, something cold and measured ticked like a clock. Phase 1 was complete. Now came Phase 2. The trap. David made the world look ordinary on purpose. He wore shirts with coffee stains, read the paper at the breakfast table, and let the kids climb into his lap while he pretended to fumble sports schedules. Laura believed his calm. The house hummed with normalcy, until it didn't. Maya's phone call arrived at 9:03 a.m. "We filed today. Keep everything the same at home." Those words were a scalpel. David breathed, folded the laundry, and nodded as if to himself. Then he sent Alexis a single text. "Now." Alexis moved like a shadow. She didn't break into rooms or plant devices. She used what the law allows: receipts, timestamps, licensed investigators, and public records. Her camera caught Laura arriving at Ridgeview at 4:12 p.m., but the footage she forwarded David showed more. Michael Reynolds waiting in the lobby, their eyes locked like conspirators. The image was quiet but devastating, the kind of photograph that doesn't have to shout to ruin a life. David printed it and placed it beneath the family portrait on his desk. It looked wrong there, like a splinter under glass. At noon, Maya filed the petition. The clerk stamped it with a date that felt like a detonator. Laura received service at 2:46 p.m. An official envelope slid under her door while she ironed a dress for a charity gala. She opened it in front of the mirror, slow, curious, then pale. The mirror reflected a woman trying to understand the extent of her own undoing. David watched the moment from the hallway, pretending to water a fern. He saw her grip the envelope tighter, saw the tremble in her jaw. He watched her eyes search the house, as if the papers inside could tell her when and how to stop what was coming. She called Maya, angry, then pleading, promises of explanations. Maya answered calmly, "You will have an opportunity to respond. For now, don't move any funds." That was part 1 of the trap, financial paralysis. Maya had already convinced the court to freeze discretionary withdrawals over a threshold. The shared account was now effectively a museum piece, visible but frozen, until the judge could review the forensic report. Laura's reliance on their joint funds evaporated overnight. She texted Michael, "They froze the account. Can you help with rent?" The message was a needle. Alexis archived it. But David didn't want only money. He wanted the truth to be undeniable, threaded through documents and corroborated by witnesses. So he set step 2, public proof without spectacle. Alexis subpoenaed Ridgeview's leasing logs and delivered a simple stack of papers. Lease application with Laura's signature, rent receipts paid via checks from accounts tied to a Reynolds company, guest logs listing late-night entries under Michael's name. Those documents were bureaucratic and boring, perfect for court. They were the kind of pages judges trust, the kind of pages newspapers will later summarize with a headline. He also recruited witnesses with care. A doorman who remembered Laura's late-night arrivals, a neighbor who'd seen Michael carry a child's car seat into Unit 5C, a courier who'd signed for packages addressed to the kids at Ridgeview. Each testimony was mundane but knife-sharp when stitched together. Meanwhile, David staged another quiet move, custodial groundwork. He met with a child psychologist recommended by Maya and began documenting their children's routines, school drop-offs, medication schedules, the teachers who could testify to David's involvement. It wasn't about proving Laura unfit. It was about proving stability. The court favored children who kept calendars, not chaos. Laura's world narrowed. Without access to joint funds, she became dependent on Michael. Independence is a kind of confession. Yet she still moved through social rooms with the practiced ease of someone who believed charisma could paper over consequences. She gave a speech at a fundraiser, smiled for a photographer, hugged friends who would later say they never knew. Her public life remained polished, even as private ledgers told a different story. David's vengeance was surgical, not theatrical. He avoided dramatic confrontations, no shouting in restaurants, no viral videos. He wanted everything to be admissible, undeniable, and irreversible. When Laura called him that night, voice raw, tearful, he stayed controlled. "Why didn't you ask me?" she demanded. He listened. Then he said quietly, "Because the numbers told me what words would not." She begged for conversation. He offered none. He had already set the next phase into motion, discovery. He would force Michael's company records into light, and once those corporate ledgers were pried open, there would be no safe hiding place. Before bed, David sat at his desk and arranged the evidence into a sequence. Bank statements, lease agreement, time-stamped photos, text messages, witness notes. Each item clicked into place like a bone in a skeleton. He paused over a photo of the kids. Evan asleep on his shoulder, Mia with a gap-toothed smile. He traced Mia's freckle with his thumbnail and felt the low, steady ache any father knows. This wasn't about humiliation for the sake of it. It was about reassembling what had been taken. Outside, the city glittered with 1,000 small untruths, advertisements, polite smiles, polite lies. Inside, a different kind of light broke across the table, legal, cold, and relentless. When Laura fell asleep that night, exhausted from calls and whispered promises she couldn't keep, David stayed awake mapping the next moves. Level 2 of his 7-layer plan was executed. Money frozen, rendezvous exposed, the house of cards now trembling. He closed his laptop and walked upstairs. In the dark doorway, he hesitated, watching her breathing slow, the soft rise of her chest. He had 100 ways to hurt her. He chose instead to be watching, precise, patient. Because the worst thing he planned wasn't a spectacle. It was the slow, bureaucratic dismantling of everything she relied upon, one lawful paper at a time. Outside, a siren wailed 2 blocks away. Inside, the only sound was the soft, confident click of a locking cabinet. And somewhere in the quiet, a message arrived on Laura's phone. "Court date set for discovery. Bring everything." She read it, then whispered to the dark, "What do you want from me?" He had already decided. He wanted the truth, and he would let the law deliver it, merciless, inevitable, and final. The courthouse smelled of old files and disinfectant. 2 things that always linger after truth has been dragged into daylight. David Callahan walked in wearing the calm of a man who already knew how the story would end. Laura entered 10 minutes later, pearl earrings trembling, face set in the brittle mask of dignity. Her lawyer, Rita Connor, whispered rapid instructions. Across the aisle sat Michael Reynolds, shoulders tight, phone vibrating nonstop. He looked like a man who'd stopped breathing hours ago, but hadn't noticed yet. The bailiff called for order. The case was on record. Callahan versus Callahan, case Basher 48226-D. At the counsel table, Maya Alvarez arranged her exhibits with the grace of someone who loved precision more than power. She didn't look at Laura, she looked at the judge. "Mr. Callahan," the judge said, adjusting her glasses, "you're petitioning for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct and financial deception. You allege joint assets were misappropriated to fund an extramarital affair involving your business partner. Is that correct?" David's voice didn't tremble. "Yes, Your Honor." Maya stood. "We'll show that Mrs. Callahan systematically diverted funds from the marital account to pay for a property leased under her lover's name, using assets from the petitioner's income." Rita rose sharply. "Objection. Assumes facts, not in evidence." Maya smiled faintly. "Then let's introduce the evidence." The first document slid forward. Exhibit A. Bank statements. 6 months of transactions showing transfers to Ridgeview Apartments, LLC. Exhibit B. The lease agreement listing Laura as tenant and Michael Reynolds as co-signatory. Exhibit C. Photographic evidence of the respondent entering the building on multiple occasions outside of business hours. Exhibit D. Text message transcripts obtained through legal subpoena. Each page landed on the table like a slow hammer. Rita objected twice, but the judge overruled her both times. When the fourth exhibit arrived, photos of Laura and Michael at the Ridgeview elevator, time-stamped and authenticated by a security officer, the air in the room shifted. Michael lowered his head. Laura stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, fingers gripping her pen so hard her knuckles blanched. Maya's voice was even, professional, merciless. Your Honor, we've also discovered misuse of company funds. Mr. Reynolds, as CEO of Reynolds Analytics, directed transfers labeled as marketing expenses to cover the Ridgeview lease. The company's accountant provided an affidavit confirming no such campaigns existed. Michael's lawyer whispered furiously, but the damage was done. Furthermore, Maya continued, we have a motion for immediate paternity testing. Given financial records suggesting both children's expenses were co-managed by Mr. Reynolds, we believe biological paternity must be established before custody determinations are made. The courtroom went silent. Laura gasped, You can't, those are our children. Maya didn't look at her. That's exactly what we're about to confirm. The judge's gavel tapped once. Motion granted. Paternity test to be conducted within 7 days. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited like vultures. Michael brushed past them, but one journalist caught a photo. His hand on Laura's shoulder, her face twisted between fear and defiance. It hit the evening news before sunset. Business executive under scrutiny in divorce scandal. Back inside the quiet corridor, Maya gathered her files. You've just watched them implode, she said softly. Now we finish it. David nodded. What's next? Level 3, she said. Reputational collapse. We'll subpoena Reynolds Analytics shareholders. They'll want answers. He hesitated. And the kids? Maya's tone softened. If the results confirm what we expect, we'll file to protect you from financial liability while preserving your parental rights. David exhaled slowly. They're still my children. That doesn't change. Maya gave a faint nod. That's why you'll win. That night, the Callahan house was too quiet. Laura stayed in the guest room, her phone lighting up with messages from Michael. Panic, excuses, fear. David didn't read them. Alexis already had them archived. In his study, David stacked the court copies in a fresh folder marked Discovery, 512. Beside it sat the next folder, labeled Custody, 602. Each document was another nail, each date another blow. Outside, thunder rolled across the Chicago skyline. Inside, he whispered the question that had been looping since the beginning. How long were you planning to keep lying? He wasn't expecting an answer, because now, the truth was no longer hers to tell. It belonged to the court, the evidence, and the headlines that would follow. A week later, the DNA results arrived. Maya met him at her office, her expression clinical. It's confirmed. Both children are biologically Michael Reynolds's. David's breath caught, not with surprise, but with confirmation of what he already knew in his bones. He nodded once. Okay. Maya studied him. You're unusually calm. Calm is the last step before correction, he said quietly. She understood. Level 4 was about to begin. Custody and character. The legal strike that would turn sympathy into strength. Rain blurred the courthouse windows into soft gray streaks the morning the custody hearing began. David Callahan sat alone on the hallway bench, the file on his lap thicker than most men's forgiveness. Inside were DNA results, school records, therapy reports, proof that biology doesn't define fatherhood, but stability does. Laura arrived late, makeup flawless, dress immaculate, the same old confidence masking a crumbling center. Michael trailed a few paces behind, his tie crooked, his reputation already bleeding in the press. Their whispers broke the air. Don't look at him, Laura hissed. Michael's jaw tightened. I shouldn't even be here. But they were, summoned by the same truth they'd both tried to bury. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Callahan custody hearing, docket 4826D, parties may enter. David rose, buttoned his jacket, and walked in. Not as a husband or betrayed man, but as the one constant his children still recognized. Judge Rowan adjusted her glasses, voice measured. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, We're here to determine custody arrangements in the best interest of the children. I've reviewed financial records, paternity results, and supporting statements. Let's proceed. Maya stood first, calm, composed. Your Honor, while the DNA results are clear, biology is not synonymous with parenting. Mr. Callahan has been the sole financial and emotional provider for these children since birth. Mrs. Callahan, by contrast, has engaged in a long-term extramarital affair, misappropriating family funds and destabilizing the household. Rita Connor objected, as expected. Irrelevant to custody, moral conduct does not equal parental unfitness. Maya's reply was surgical. We agree, Your Honor, but financial deceit and emotional abandonment absolutely do. The judge nodded slightly. Continue. Maya called her first witness, Mrs. Connie Gaines, the children's homeroom teacher. Who typically picks up the children from school? Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Gaines replied. He's there every day, even when it rains. Who attended parent-teacher conferences? Mr. Callahan. Field trips? Mr. Callahan. Rita tried to pivot. Would you describe Mrs. Callahan as loving? Mrs. Gaines hesitated. When she was present. A ripple of murmurs moved through the courtroom. Next, Maya submitted Exhibit E, medical reports showing David as the parent listed for all emergency contacts, insurance, and consent forms. The paperwork painted what words couldn't. Laura's absence was now documented in ink. Then came the voice that silenced the room. Evan Callahan, 10 years old, via a recorded statement supervised by the court psychologist. Dad's the one who stays. Mom's the one who leaves when her phone rings. Even the court reporter paused, typing for a breath. When it was Laura's turn to speak, she straightened her shoulders and smiled faintly toward the judge. I made mistakes, yes, but they shouldn't erase the love my children have for me. Maya's tone was almost gentle. No one's erasing love, Mrs. Callahan, but love without consistency is confusion, and confusion is cruelty to a child. Laura's face flushed. You can't make me sound like a monster. No, Maya said. Your choices already did that. Michael shifted in his seat, hands gripping the armrests. He'd spent weeks in damage control at Reynolds Analytics, board investigations, sponsor withdrawals, and whispers in every investor circle. The affair had detonated his empire. And the man who once mocked David's calm now envied it. By late afternoon, the hearing closed. Judge Rowan tapped her pen against the bench, then read from her notes. The court finds that Mr. Callahan has demonstrated exceptional stability, emotional commitment, and moral restraint in circumstances that would break most individuals. Primary physical custody is hereby granted to the petitioner, Mr. Callahan. Mrs. Callahan is awarded supervised visitation, pending evaluation. Mr. Reynolds is instructed to comply with financial restitution and refrain from contact with the children until further notice. Laura covered her mouth, trembling. Michael turned pale. Maya gathered the papers calmly, her tone quiet but final. That's level 4, she whispered to David. You're ahead of schedule. He didn't smile. He simply nodded. Good. That night, the house was both emptier and fuller. The children slept soundly in their rooms, safe, unaware of the war fought on their behalf. David stood in the hallway, watching the glow from their nightlights spill across the floor. Every breath they took sounded like proof that he'd done the right thing. He whispered to himself, They're mine, not by blood, by choice. Downstairs, his phone buzzed, a message from Maya. Michael's board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. Alexis just confirmed leaked filings. Their audit shows the Ridgeview transfers as falsified corporate expenses. David stared at the message and exhaled slowly. Another domino, another quiet collapse. He walked to the fireplace and opened the drawer where Laura's old love letters lay. Every promise she'd ever written in the name of loyalty. He fed them into the flame one by one, watching them curl into ash. The light from the fire flickered against his face, soft and merciless. Because revenge, in its purest form, isn't fire, it's exposure. And tomorrow, level 5 would begin. Public judgment. When the world finds out. It started with a headline. Small, precise, lethal. Tech executive accused of diverting corporate funds to finance affair. Internal audit confirms fraudulent transfers. Within hours, the story spread from business pages to morning talk shows. By noon, the Russia Reynolds scandal was trending. David Callahan sat in his office with his blinds half drawn, the hum of computers masking the chaos he'd quietly orchestrated. The article on his screen cited court filings from Callahan versus Callahan and included redacted evidence, Ridgeview leases, transaction memos, timestamps. Nothing sensational, just truth arranged in a way that destroyed reputation faster than rumor ever could. He didn't leak it. He didn't need to. Court documents are public record. Truth leaks itself when the lies are thick enough. At Reynolds Analytics, panic came dressed in suits. Board members convened an emergency meeting at 8:00 a.m. sharp. The glass conference room looked like a crime scene. Faces pale, papers everywhere. Michael sat at the head of the table, sleeves rolled, voice breaking. "It's being exaggerated. We'll issue a statement." But the CFO slid a folder toward him. "The SEC already requested explanations. They want to know why company funds went to a personal lease. That's not exaggeration, Mike. That's embezzlement." Michael's phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from investors, sponsors, journalists. Each one felt like another cut. "Gentlemen," said the chairman finally, "for the sake of the company, Mr. Reynolds will be stepping down effective immediately." The room fell silent. The man who once mocked David's cautious honesty was now watching his own empire dissolve like sugar in rain. Outside, cameras waited. He kept his head down as flashbulbs ignited across the parking lot. One reporter shouted, "Who's Laura Callahan to you?" He didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. At home, Laura watched the story unfold on the living room TV. Her reflection stared back from the screen. A woman once admired. Now a headline's cautionary tale. Wife of executive at center of scandal named in court filings, alleging misuse of joint funds and extramarital relationship with company CEO. Her phone rang until it burned her hand. Friends she'd once bragged to were suddenly unavailable. Invitations vanished from group chats. The women who envied her last month were now whispering about her children, her affairs, her downfall. She switched off the TV, but the silence screamed louder. At 3 p.m., Maya called. "Congratulations," she said simply. "They're both finished." David's tone was steady. "Define finished." Michael's resignation is public. The board voted to file civil claims for restitution. Laura's legal team is begging for settlement. She wants to avoid another round of press. "You'll have your apology in writing by morning?" "Not public enough," David replied. Maya hesitated. "You're entitled to protect your name, not ruin hers." He stared at the window's reflection, his own calm face staring back. The world should know what kindness costs. That night, Claire Hammond, the same journalist who first covered the court filing, released an exclusive feature, Inside the Betrayal, How One Husband's Calm Precision Unraveled a Corporate Deception. The article wasn't revenge, it was revelation. It painted David as composed, principled, unwilling to be cruel, but unflinching in pursuit of truth. It quoted the judge's remarks on his extraordinary restraint under provocation. Laura's name trended again, but this time beside words like fraud, custody, and disgraced. Her inbox flooded with canceled appearances and revoked brand partnerships. Michael's former company began recalling sponsorships bearing his name. The two of them, once symbols of success, had become each other's wreckage. David didn't celebrate. He spent that evening at the park with the kids. Evan chased pigeons. Mia ate ice cream that melted too fast. Other parents recognized him from the news, half whispering, half admiring, but he ignored them. He crouched beside Mia, wiping her cheek with a napkin. "Sticky hands, huh?" She laughed. "You always say that." "Yeah," he said softly, "because it's always true." In that moment, everything noisy in the world went quiet. The lawsuits, the headlines, the ruined reputations. None of it mattered as much as the child who still reached for his hand without hesitation. Later that night, Laura showed up at his door. Her eyes were swollen, her voice unrecognizable. "David, please, you've proved your point. I lost everything. Just stop." He stood in the doorway, neither cruel nor kind. Stop what? Whatever this is. Her voice cracked. The press, the leaks, the silence. You won. What more do you want? He studied her face. The woman who'd once sworn loyalty now begging for mercy. Do you remember, he said quietly, when you told me people don't change, they just hide better? She blinked, confused. You were right, he said, closing the door gently. Except I didn't hide. I waited. Inside, he poured himself a drink. Outside, flash bulbs from a distant news van reflected off the window pane. He didn't raise his glass in victory. He just exhaled. Because revenge isn't rage, it's restoration. And restoration is quiet. By morning, Michael Reynolds' resignation letter was front-page news. Laura Callahan's public apology followed an hour later, her statement ending with 7 words that finally told the truth. My husband saw everything, I just didn't see him. David closed the article, turned off his phone, and looked out at the sunrise. There were still 2 layers of his plan left, legal restitution and emotional closure. But the world already knew what mattered most. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't begged. He simply let the truth do the shouting for him. Justice doesn't always thunder. Sometimes it whispers through paper. 3 weeks after the public fallout, the courtroom filled again, this time for restitution and financial judgment. David Callahan arrived without entourage, without theatrics. Just him, Maya Alvarez, and a stack of carefully bound evidence thicker than any apology Laura could ever write. At the defense table, Laura looked like a ghost of her former self, hair pinned back neatly, but her eyes hollow. Michael Reynolds sat beside his corporate attorney, a man used to cleaning other people's messes for a fee per hour. They both avoided eye contact with David. They'd spent months rehearsing denials. Now they were running out of words. The judge entered. We're here to determine damages and restitution following the findings in Callahan v. Callahan and related corporate misuse proceedings. David didn't blink. He'd waited for this. Not to reclaim money, but to reclaim truth quantified. Maya rose, calm, unhurried. Your Honor, the record shows joint marital funds misappropriated to cover Mr. Reynolds' private lease, travel, and luxury expenses, all under Mrs. Callahan's authorization. We are seeking reimbursement of $248,000 in misused assets, attorney fees, and penalties. Rita Connor adjusted her glasses. Mrs. Callahan maintains she acted under emotional distress. Her intentions were never to defraud her husband. Maya's tone didn't waver. Intent doesn't change arithmetic. She handed over a ledger, Alexis's final forensic summary, every cent traced, every withdrawal labeled. Each entry was a wound with a receipt, hotel, lease, transfers, boutique stores, spa retreats under business consulting. Then came the receipts that mattered most, the payments to Ridgeview Apartments. Your Honor, Maya continued, these were paid not only from the marital account, but from company funds disguised as client housing. Mr. Reynolds and Mrs. Callahan both benefited. Both should repay. The judge nodded, noted. When Michael took the stand, his lawyer whispered, stick to remorse, not excuses. But remorse, like integrity, can't be faked twice. I made mistakes, Michael stammered. They weren't malicious. Maya didn't flinch. So you redirected company money to conceal an affair, signed falsified expense reports, and used another man's joint account to pay for your mistress's rent? Non-maliciously? Michael's jaw locked. I regret it. Regret doesn't balance ledgers, Mr. Reynolds. The courtroom laughed once nervously. The judge tapped her gavel for silence. Laura followed. She'd rehearsed her tears, but they didn't arrive on time. I loved my husband once, she began. But things changed. I didn't plan for this to happen. I never meant to hurt anyone. Maya stepped closer. You meant to withdraw funds, though. You meant to sign that lease. You meant to take your husband's money to keep your lover comfortable. Was that love, too? Laura's composure cracked. He was there for me when David wasn't. Maya tilted her head slightly. At Ridgeview Apartments? The courtroom fell silent again. The judge looked over the papers, then spoke with the crisp finality of law meeting conscience. The court orders restitution to the petitioner, Mr. Callahan, in the amount of $312,400, covering misused assets, attorney's fees, and interest. Furthermore, Mrs. Callahan's claim for alimony is denied on grounds of proven financial misconduct. Mr. Reynolds is ordered to pay restitution to both the petitioner and Reynolds Analytics, per the separate civil suit already filed. The court finds no further grounds for leniency. The gavel struck once. The sound was clean, surgical, like a seal on an envelope David had waited a year to close. After court, reporters swarmed the steps again. Michael said nothing. His lawyer shielded him with a briefcase and a stare. Laura, clutching her purse, tried to move through the crowd. A microphone caught her whisper. "I never thought he'd take it this far." David passed her quietly. "I didn't take it far," he said without looking at her. "You did." 2 weeks later, his account reflected the transfer. Restitution complete. Money that once fueled deception now rebuilt something honest. A trust fund for the children, secured under his sole name. Maya's text came through that evening. "Final confirmation. Settlement cleared. You've recovered everything." David typed one reply, "Not everything," then set the phone down. Because money was measurable, peace wasn't. He spent that night cleaning his study, shredding old folders, archiving the last traces of evidence. Each page carried echoes, names, times, lies. He kept one item, a small photo of the children, smiling in front of the courthouse fountain on the day custody was finalized. Outside, the city's skyline glowed like molten glass. Inside, the silence finally felt earned. David leaned back, whispering to himself, "They tried to bankrupt me with betrayal. I made them pay in truth." He wasn't angry anymore, just finished. The vengeance had never been about fury. It had been about math. And now, for the first time since that morning, he saw the word Ridgeview on his bank statement. The numbers finally made sense again. There are moments when silence is louder than sirens, when justice doesn't need applause because the wreckage speaks for itself. 3 months after the final judgment, the Callahan scandal was no longer news. It had become history. But for the people inside it, the dust was still settling. David Callahan didn't rebuild fast. He rebuilt right. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow. The air was lighter, the walls quieter. The blue folder that started everything was gone. In its place sat 2 framed drawings from Evan and Mia, one of a man holding their hands, the other of a sunrise with the word home. That was enough. Across the city, Laura was learning how quickly admiration turns to avoidance. Friends who once filled her weekends with brunch and laughter now pretended not to see her in stores. Her phone barely rang, except for debt collectors and a therapist she couldn't afford. The glossy perfection that once defined her had cracked into something unrecognizable. She rented a small apartment in the outskirts of Chicago, 2 bedrooms, peeling paint, a leaky faucet that hissed all night. The same sound she once called cheap now kept her awake, echoing every choice she wished she hadn't made. Sometimes she stared at the empty ring mark on her finger and whispered, "He really meant it." Then she'd pour another glass of wine and scroll through old photos, her smile beside David's steady eyes. She'd zoom in on those eyes now, trying to read what she missed. She found only one thing: finality. Michael Reynolds, once the face of Reynolds Analytics, was nowhere to be seen. After resigning, he vanished from public view. The company stripped his name from the building, wiped his biography from the website, and replaced him with an interim CEO who opened the first board meeting with a single statement: "Integrity is not optional." Rumor had it Michael sold his penthouse to cover legal fees. Reporters spotted him once at a small airport cafe. No entourage, no driver, no watch that cost more than a car. He ordered black coffee, paid in cash, and left a $20 tip. Some said it was guilt. Others said it was a man trying to buy a piece of his old self back. For David, life had settled into something resembling peace, but not simplicity. Peace, he'd learned, had weight. It needed tending, just like grief. Maya called occasionally with updates about lingering paperwork. Alexis sent her final invoice, then a short note. "You're one of the rare ones who fought smart." He paid both without hesitation. The war was over, but the discipline stayed. He woke at dawn each day, made coffee, and sat by the window. The same ritual that had once started everything. Except now there was no folder, no suspicion. Just quiet gratitude that he'd survived a world that tried to unmake him. One Saturday, Laura showed up unannounced. The kids were in the backyard with their babysitter. The sound of their laughter floated through the window. David opened the door, surprised but not startled. She stood there, smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. "David," she said softly, "I wanted to say sorry." He studied her for a long time. No hatred, just recognition of something already buried. "You already did," he replied. She shook her head. "No, that was paperwork. This is me." He stepped aside, letting her inside for the first time since everything fell apart. She looked around. The same furniture, the same scent of cedar and coffee, yet everything felt different. "Feels smaller," she murmured. "No," he said. "You just used to fill it with noise." Tears gathered, but she didn't cry. "Do they still talk about me?" "They talk about how much they love you," he said simply. "That's enough." "Do you hate me?" He met her eyes. "I don't have room for that anymore." She nodded slowly, turning toward the door. As she stepped out, she whispered, "You were always better than I deserved." He didn't answer. The truth didn't need his help anymore. From the driveway, she saw Evan running toward him, laughing, arms wide. David lifted his son easily, his expression warm but steady. That single image hit Laura harder than any verdict, because it was proof that love had survived, just not hers. That night, after putting the children to bed, David sat outside under a quiet sky. No courtrooms, no headlines, no witnesses. Just him and the sound of wind against the trees. He thought of Maya's words. "You're ahead of schedule." He thought of Alexis's note. "You fought smart." And then he thought of Laura's last whisper. "You were always better than I deserved." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I just learned faster." Revenge, he realized, was never the real story. It was reclamation. Of peace. Of pride. Of the kind of silence you earn only after you've said everything that needed to be said, without raising your voice once. Somewhere far away, the city kept its promises to noise and chaos. But inside one house on a quiet street, a man finally exhaled. He'd lost a marriage, a friend, and illusions about loyalty. But in their place, he'd gained something rarer. Clarity. 2 years later, the world had moved on. But the truth never really does. David Callahan's name now meant something different in the city. To some, he was the man who exposed one of Chicago's biggest corporate scandals. To others, he was simply the husband who never lost his temper. To those who mattered, Evan and Mia, he was just Dad. The morning light cut across his kitchen table like memory made visible. Evan, now 12, was building a science project with wires and cardboard. Mia sat beside him, coloring clouds that looked like hearts. The smell of pancakes filled the house. It was ordinary, and that was everything he'd fought for. When he dropped them off at school, a teacher waved him over. "Your kids are thriving, Mr. Callahan," she said. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." He smiled, polite but quiet. He didn't say the truth, that what he'd done wasn't magic. It was simply staying. He watched the kids run toward the building, backpacks bouncing. Laura arrived seconds later for her visitation day, hair tied back, clean, humble, almost human again. She waved nervously from across the lot. He nodded back once. No hate, no warmth, just peace. The distance between them wasn't punishment anymore. It was understanding. Later that afternoon, David walked through downtown on his lunch break. He passed a bookstore window and stopped cold. There on the display shelf sat a newly released business memoir by a former journalist, Claire Hammond, the same one who broke the scandal years ago. He stepped closer. The title read, "The Quiet Man, How Stillness Became the Loudest Revenge." The first page he flipped to carried a quote in bold. He didn't fight his enemies with rage. He fought them with record-keeping. He smiled faintly and closed the book. He didn't need the credit. The story belonged to whoever found strength in it. That night, he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee. The neighborhood was still, the kind of still that felt earned. He thought of Michael. Rumors said he'd moved to Texas, running a small consultancy no one had heard of. He thought of Laura, working part-time at a boutique, paying off restitution slowly but consistently. He didn't wish them pain. He wished them clarity. The same clarity that nearly cost him everything, but gave him himself back. Maya still checked in sometimes. "You ever going to remarry?" She'd teased over coffee a few weeks ago. He'd smiled. "No need. I already have what I lost." "What's that?" she asked. He looked out the window and said, "Peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's honesty." At 10 p.m., his phone buzzed. A message from Alexis Vaughn, the forensic accountant who started it all. "Saw the feature on you in Hammond's book. Proud to have been a footnote in the cleanest revenge I've ever seen." He typed back, "It was never revenge, just math and mercy." Then he turned the phone face down. "Upstairs." Mia stirred in her sleep. He tucked the blanket under her chin. "Good night, sweetheart," he whispered. Evan mumbled from the next room, half dreaming. "Dad, are we rich again?" David smiled. "Richer." Because wealth wasn't numbers in a bank anymore. It was this, the sound of breathing in a safe house, laughter without lies, love without conditions. He returned to his desk, opened his laptop, and began writing something new. Not a report, not evidence, not even a story. A letter. "To my children, one day you'll understand that revenge is never about destruction. It's about definition. It's about showing the world who you are when someone tries to tell it otherwise. Your mother and I made choices. Some broke us, some built us. But I want you to know this. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's proof that the truth didn't ruin you. It refined you. Love, Dad." He saved the file and named it simply Legacy. Outside, the first hint of dawn crept over the city skyline. David watched it from his porch as the streetlights blinked out one by one. The air smelled like rain and renewal. He whispered to the morning, "It's over." And for the first time in years, the words didn't sound like surrender. They sounded like freedom. Because his greatest revenge wasn't in winning courtrooms or reclaiming money. It was in proving that a man can lose everything and still end with peace, dignity, and truth intact.